Here is one of your other complaints about the COVID relief bill. Take a look, sir.
Look how crazy some of the Democratic ideas are. I mean, they had a chance on Saturday morning to stop checks from going to prisoners, from going to the Boston bomber, for instance. And on that vote, they declined. Every single Democrat wanted to continue the practice of sending checks to prisoners.
But, Senator, under two previous COVID relief bills that you supported and voted for and that President Trump signed, prisoners also got checks in those bills.
Well, Chris, that was obviously never Congress's intent. The Trump administration, IRS, and Treasury Department did not send checks to prisoners. Liberal advocacy groups sued to try to force that. A liberal judge said they had to. This month was the first time we ever had a simple up or down vote on whether those checks should go to prisoners. And the simple fact is that every Democrat voted to keep sending checks to prisoners. I don't think that's a smart idea. I suspect most Americans don't either.
Because if they weren't hypocrites, what would they be? This is Republican Senator Tom Cotton pointing out that the American Rescue Plan would send stimulus checks to inmates in his desperation to find something, anything, to complain about with regard to this legislation that has the support of an overwhelming 75% of Americans. And so Cotton landed on the fact that some checks go to inmates to try and drum up opposition to a bill that will otherwise send 85% of Americans checks, cut child poverty in half, fund vaccine distribution, and allocate money to cities and states so that teachers and firefighters and police officers and first responders can continue working. Yeah, no, that sounds awful. First of all, if Tom Cotton was so against any money whatsoever going to inmates, why didn't he say a word about it before? As Chris Wallace noted, the previous two bills had the same provision, and yet at no point while Trump was president did Tom Cotton take to the floor or do the rounds on cable news decrying what is so clearly a disqualifying provision. That is, until Joe Biden became president, at which point a bill that will help hundreds of millions of Americans is suddenly trashed because a fraction of a percent of relief checks go to inmates. It's almost like, and bear with me on this one, Tom Cotton is purposefully looking for something to complain about because it's more important to hurt Democrats than to help Americans. The fact is that this was an emergency bill intended for people who desperately need relief. And so in order to speed things along, Democrats went by the same criteria as the previous bills that every Republican voted for. So the fact that Republicans are suddenly balking now that Biden's in office is proof that they're not concerned with substance, they're concerned with politics. Their only priority is trying to make an insanely popular bill look bad, even if they prove themselves hypocrites in the process. And by the way, when I say a fraction of a percent, that's based on this number by Republican Senator Bill Cassidy, who complained about the same thing last week while speaking to Chris Wallace.
Stimulus payments will go to 91% of the adults in your state of Louisiana and 93% of the children. And the child tax credit will go to the families of 1 million kids in Louisiana. Senator, are you saying the people of your state don't need that money?
First, let me say Republicans offered an alternative which included that sort of money for the people who needed it. So yes, economic help was needed for families as well as for businesses. We're on board with that. You would have had bipartisan support for that. But you know what it also includes? It includes $1.9 billion to give stimulus checks to inmates. Now, inmates are already paid for by the taxpayer. They can't stimulate the economy unless they're purchasing contraband. So here we have $1.9 billion stimulus checks going to inmates. I put up an amendment to strike that, and it was unanimously opposed by Democrats. That's the sort of thing which should not be included.
Cassidy cites $1.9 billion going to inmates. In a $1.9 trillion bill, that is 0.1% of the bill. That's Republicans' beef with this legislation. They all voted no because apparently 0.1% was unacceptable to them. You'd think that if the GOP were such sticklers about every last cent, they wouldn't have sat idly by as $7.8 trillion was added to the debt in the last 4 years. Guess their fiscal responsibility only resurfaces when a Democrat's in office. Here's the issue with all of this. Republicans like Tom Cotton know that this bill is popular. It's supported by 3/4 of all Americans. But they decided that opposing Joe Biden was more important than helping Americans, and so now they're left with the unenviable task of nitpicking tiny little elements of this bill to attack, which not only makes them seem petty, but woefully out of touch with the rest of the country. At the end of the day, it was them who decided to oppose this legislation, even though Democrats practically begged them to get on board, practically begged them to be able to take credit for this bill. So they can clutch their pearls over provisions that account for 0.1% of this package, but they're just proving that they care more about politics than Americans' lives. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell. And please subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I not only break down the biggest stories of the week, but I also interview major players in the world of politics, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Nancy Pelosi, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker, Jamie Raskin, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.